All right, so we've got this mountain of building plans and construction guides.
Blueprints, drawings, permits, the whole shebang.
Yeah, the whole shebang. And I'm already feeling a little overwhelmed, honestly.
Well, that's understandable. Building a house is no small feat.
It's like a giant puzzle, right?
Yeah, like a giant, very expensive 3D puzzle, and all the pieces are interconnected.
Right, and that's what we're diving into today, understanding all those pieces and how they fit together. So if you've ever dreamt of building your own place or just wondered what goes on behind those construction fences, you are in the right place.
Absolutely. We're going to unpack everything from site preparation and regulations to those exciting floor plans and all the little details that make a house a home.
Awesome. I'm excited to get started. Let's dive right in. So the first document I'm seeing here is labeled Basic Residential DWGS 4012, and it seems to be all about the site specs, kind of the groundwork, before we even think about walls and roofs.
It's all about laying the foundation, both literally and figuratively. You need to make sure the site is prepped and ready to go before you start bringing in materials and equipment.
Right, because you can't build a house on a swamp. Or can you?
Well, maybe in Florida. But jokes aside, there are specific regulations and guidelines that dictate how a site needs to be prepared for construction.
Okay, so let's talk about those regulations. I'm seeing a requirement for 20% site permeability, which translates to 80.2 square meters. What exactly does that mean?
It means that 20% of your property needs to be permeable, allowing water to soak into the ground. It's all about preventing flooding and erosion.
Makes sense. We don't want a house floating away in the first rainstorm. And I'm seeing a reference here to sheet A03 for more details on site works. It seems like all these documents are interlinked, like a chain reaction.
Absolutely. Everything is connected. Each decision you make early on can impact later stages of the project.
Okay, so before we get lost in those details, let's talk about permits. I'm seeing asset protection permit mentioned here. What's that all about?
It's a permit that ensures the site is safe for everyone involved, the workers, the surrounding environment, and even your neighbors.
Speaking of neighbors, it's probably a good idea to give them a heads up before construction begins, right? Nobody likes being surprised by a construction zone next door.
Absolutely. Communication and transparency with your neighbors are essential. It can save you a lot of headaches down the road.
Okay, and what about boundary fencing? I'm seeing a requirement for a 1.8-meter high fence.
Yeah, that's pretty standard for privacy and security, especially in residential areas. The developer guidelines usually dictate those specifics.
Right. And something else that caught my eye is a reference to AS 3660.1 2000. What's that all about?
That's the Australian standard for termite management. It might seem like a small detail, but termites can cause major damage if left unchecked.
Oh, wow. Okay. Termites. I definitely don't want those anywhere near my dream home.
Termite protection is essential in Australia. It's not just about peace of mind. It's about protecting your investment.
Okay, good to know. Now let's talk about something I always find fascinating. Drainage. I'm seeing a requirement for a 1.100 grade for stormwater drainage. What does that mean in practical terms?
It means a gentle slope that ensures water flows away from the structure. Think of it as guiding the water away from your house and preventing potential problems like pooling or erosion.
It's like a little water slide for rainwater. And I'm seeing a note about inspection openings at regular intervals.
Those are crucial for maintenance. They allow you to inspect the drainage system and clear any blockages before they become major issues.
Okay, now for the part I've been looking forward to. The floor plan. I love seeing how a house is laid out, the flow between rooms, all those exciting details.
The floor plan is where the house really starts to take shape, moving from the foundational elements to the heart of your future home.
Right. This document is still labeled Basic Residential DWGS 4012, but this floor plan feels anything but basic.
Well, it's a starting point, but even in a basic plan, there are a lot of important elements to consider.
Yeah, like the layout of the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the kitchen, the living areas, the porch. It's all starting to come together in my mind.
Don't get too lost in the daydreams just yet. There's some less glamorous details to keep in mind, like the placement of the sewer tie and the LPOD, that's the legal point of discharge.
Right, gotta keep those practicalities in mind. And what about all the little details like the placement of electrical meter boxes and the types of doors?
Those details are important too. They impact the functionality and feel of your home. Do you want sliding doors or awning windows? Where do you want to place the electrical outlets? It's all about thinking through those details and how they affect your daily life.
Okay, I'm starting to feel like an architect already. But before I get too carried away, we need to talk about safety and compliance. I'm seeing a reference to AS 1288-2006, which deals with glazing materials. What's the significance of that?
That's a standard that focuses on safety. particularly when it comes to glass. It specifies the type of glass required in different areas of the house, especially in areas where accidental breakage could pose a risk.
So like near doors, stairs, and low windows. Makes sense, especially if there are kids around.
Exactly. Safety is paramount, and building codes are designed to minimize risks and ensure the house is a safe and comfortable environment.
And I'm also seeing a reference to AS 2467 1999 for window assemblies. I'm guessing that's about ensuring the windows are properly installed and weatherproof?
You got it. Window assemblies need to meet certain standards for durability, weather resistance, and functionality. It's not just about aesthetics. It's about making sure the house is built to last.
Right. And what about these articulation joints I'm seeing mentioned? It seems they're related to soil reports.
Those are gaps strategically placed within the structure to allow for movement. Soil can expand and contract with changes in temperature and moisture, and these joints prevent cracking and damage by allowing the building to flex.
So it's all about working with the forces of nature, not against them.
Exactly. Building a house is a constant dance between design and the elements.
Okay, let's move on to another crucial aspect, smoke detectors. I see AS 3786 1993 mandates connecting them to the main switchboard with a battery backup.
That's a fundamental safety measure. Smoke detectors provide early warning in case of a fire, and connecting them to the main switchboard ensures they're always powered, even if there's a power outage.
Layers of protection. I like it, and it's great to see a nod to sustainability with this 2,000-liter rainwater tank.
Rainwater harvesting is becoming increasingly popular. It's good for the environment, and it can save you money on your water bill.
And I see an overflow drain is also required, which makes sense to prevent flooding.
You need a way to manage the excess water, especially during heavy rainfall. It's all about thinking ahead and anticipating potential issues.
Right, and it seems like we're constantly doing that in this deep dive, thinking ahead, connecting the dots, making sure every detail is considered.
Building a house is a complex process, and overlooking seemingly small details can have big consequences down the road. That's why it's important to have a holistic understanding of all the elements involved.
Okay, so we've covered site prep, drainage, the floor plan, safety features, and even a touch of sustainability. What's next on our agenda?
Let's move on to the structural framework of the house. We'll talk about trusses, wall bracing, and the importance of ensuring the structure is sound and built to withstand the test of time.
Okay, let's dive into the bones of the house.
And don't worry, we'll keep it interesting.
I have no doubt about that.
So first things first, let's talk about trusses. You know, those triangular structures that support the roof.
I've definitely seen them, but I don't know much about them. Why are they so important?
They're crucial for supporting the weight of the roof, as well as resisting wind, snow, and other loads. The design of the trusses needs to be carefully considered and approved by the building surveyor to ensure they meet the requirements of the building code.
It's amazing how much engineering goes into something we often take for granted, like a roof over our heads.
Every element of a house is designed for a specific purpose, and it all comes together to create a safe and functional living space.
Okay, and I'm seeing a reference to AS 1684-2012, which deals with wall bracing.
Wall bracing is all about providing additional strength and stability to the walls. Think of it as reinforcing the structure, making it more resistant to wind loads and other forces that can act on the house.
It's like giving the house an internal skeleton.
Exactly. It's all about creating a strong and resilient structure that can withstand the elements.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already. We talked about the foundation, the site prep, the floor plan, safety, and now the structural framework. I'm starting to feel like I could build a house myself.
Well, maybe not just yet, but you're definitely gaining a deeper understanding of what goes into creating a home from the ground up. And that's a great start.
I'm loving this deep dive. So where do we go from here?
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about a topic that often gets overlooked in the excitement of design and construction: contracts.
Contracts. Okay, now we're talking business. I'm ready to learn the legal ropes of building a dream home.
Think of it as the framework that ensures your dream home is built on a foundation of clear expectations and legal protection. And to navigate this world, we'll be turning to the CPCC CBC 4013 documents you've provided.
I'm ready to dive into the legalese. Bring it on.
Okay, so let's start by talking about the different types of tenders. It's basically the process of soliciting bids from contractors.
I've heard those terms thrown around. Open tendering, selective tendering, negotiated tendering. But can we break those down a bit? I'm still trying to wrap my head around the nuances of each.
Sure, happy to break it down. Let's start with open tendering. Think of it as casting a wide net. You're essentially advertising your project publicly and inviting any interested contractor to submit a bid.
So you're maximizing your options, potentially finding a hidden gem amongst the bids.
Exactly. It's all about exploring as many possibilities as possible.
And I imagine that can also be overwhelming. I mean, sifting through a mountain of bids.
Yeah, it can be a time-consuming process, especially for larger or more complex projects. That's where selective tendering comes in.
Okay, so with selective tendering, you're being a little bit more, well, selective.
Precisely. Instead of opening it up to everyone, you pre-select a group of contractors based on their qualifications, their experience, their reputation, and you invite just those select few to submit bids.
So it's like creating a short list of your top contenders.
Exactly. You're focusing on quality and expertise from the start.
Makes sense. And then there's negotiated tendering, which I'm guessing is for more specialized or complex projects.
You got it. This is often used when you might already have a specific contractor in mind, maybe someone you've worked with before, or someone who has a particular expertise that's essential for your project.
So in that case, you just skip the whole bidding process and go straight to negotiating the contract with your chosen contractor.
It's more about working directly with the contractor to establish the terms and pricing. It could be a more collaborative approach.
It sounds like each tendering method has its own pros and cons, and choosing the right one depends on your specific needs and priorities.
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to construction contracts. It's all about finding the right fit for your project and your peace of mind.
All right, I'm definitely starting to see how important these contracts are. It's not just about building a house, it's about building a strong foundation for the entire project.
You're absolutely right. And that foundation starts with a solid understanding of the legal framework that governs the construction process.
I'm ready to dive deeper into that legal framework.
Great, because there's a lot more to unpack. But for now, let's take a little break and come back to this fascinating world of contracts and bids in part 2 of our deep dive.
Welcome back. Last time, we dove headfirst into site prep, those all-important regulations, even got a sneak peek at the floor plan, which I'm still kind of obsessing over, to be honest.
Yeah, floor plans are definitely exciting. It's where the house really starts to come alive, you know?
Right. But before I get too carried away with picking out countertops and paint colors, we need to talk about something a little less glamorous, but equally important. Risk.
Yeah, risk management is crucial in any construction project. You've got to be prepared for the unexpected, or those dream home fantasies can turn into nightmares pretty quickly.
Okay, so let's unpack some of those potential nightmares. What are some of the biggest risks that homeowners and contractors need to be aware of?
Well, breach of contract is a big one. It might seem like a worst-case scenario, but it happens more often than you'd think.
Breach of contract. That sounds serious. Paint me a picture. What does that actually look like in a real-world construction project?
Imagine this. A contractor consistently misses deadlines. They're using substandard materials that don't meet the specifications, or maybe they're making significant changes to the design without proper authorization.
Oh no, that sounds like a recipe for disaster, delays, probably legal battles, right?
It can be. That's why having a clear, detailed contract is so important. It outlines everyone's responsibilities and expectations, kind of like a safety net for both the homeowner and the contractor.
Right, because when things go wrong, you need that legal document to fall back on.
Absolutely. Yeah. It protects both parties and helps ensure that the project stays on track and everyone is accountable.
Okay, so breach of contract is a big one. What else should we be worried about?
Well, delays are pretty much inevitable in construction. They can pop up for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, I can imagine. Weather, material shortages, those kinds of things.
Exactly. Weather's a classic one, especially in areas with, distinct seasons, rain, wind, extreme temperatures. All of those can bring a construction site to a standstill.
Right, and then there are material shortages. I've heard horror stories about people waiting months for lumber or appliances.
Yeah, supply chain disruptions have become a major challenge in recent years, especially with all the global events happening.
It's like a domino effect. One thing gets delayed, and it throws off the entire project timeline.
Exactly. And then you have to factor in labor issues. Finding skilled workers can be tough, and sometimes unexpected things happen, illnesses, or even just communication breakdowns within the team.
So many moving parts, so many things that can go wrong. It makes my head spin just thinking about it.
It's a lot to manage, that's for sure. But that's why good communication and proactive planning are so crucial. You need a contractor who's on top of things, who can anticipate potential problems and come up with solutions.
So it's all about finding the right contractor, someone you can trust to navigate those choppy waters.
Absolutely. Choosing the right contractor can make or break your project. It's like, choosing a captain for your ship.
I like that analogy. Okay, so we've talked about breach of contract and delays. What about payment disputes? Those seem like a recipe for stress and headaches.
They can be. Payment disputes often arise from disagreements about the quality of work or maybe changes to the scope of the project. Sometimes it's just a matter of misinterpreting the payment terms in the contract.
It seems like having a rock-solid contract is the best defense against these kinds of disputes.
Absolutely. The contract should clearly outline the payment schedule, what triggers each payment, and the procedures for handling any disagreements. It's all about being transparent and having everything in writing.
Okay, so transparency is key. And what about those progress payments we talked about earlier? Can you remind me how those work?
Sure, progress payments are made at predetermined stages of the project, often tied to the completion of certain milestones. For example, there might be a payment when the foundation is poured, another when the framing is done, and so on.
It's like breaking down the overall payment into smaller chunks aligned with the progress of the work, right?
Exactly. It helps keep the project moving forward, ensures the contractor has the funds to cover expenses, and keeps the homeowner informed about the progress.
But what happens if a progress payment is delayed? What are the potential consequences?
Well, it can disrupt the entire flow of the project. The contractor might not have the funds to continue working, and it can create tension and mistrust between the homeowner and the contractor, potentially leading to bigger disputes down the line.
Okay, so it's important to stay on top of those payments and make sure everyone is on the same page.
Communication and a well-structured payment schedule are essential for preventing those kinds of issues.
So we've talked about breach of contract, delays, payment disputes, all pretty heavy stuff. Are there any other risks that we should be aware of?
There are a few more worth mentioning. One is inadequate insurance coverage.
Oh, right, insurance. I guess with all the risks involved in construction, having the right insurance is crucial.
Absolutely. Both the homeowner and the contractor need to have the appropriate policies in place. The homeowner typically needs builder's risk insurance to cover damage to the property during construction, while the contractor needs liability insurance to cover accidents or injuries on the job site.
Okay, so it's like a safety net for everyone involved, just in case something unexpected happens.
Exactly. It protects everyone from the financial fallout of unforeseen events.
Okay, anything else? I'm starting to feel like I need to buy a whole stack of insurance policies just to think about building a house.
Well, don't get too overwhelmed. Just remember that risk is a part of any construction project. The key is to be aware of those risks and take steps to mitigate them.
Good point. So what are some other things that could go wrong?
Unforeseen site conditions are another big one. We talked about discovering buried utilities or unstable soil earlier, but there are other surprises that can pop up during construction.
Like what? I'm getting nervous just thinking about it.
You might encounter unexpected rock formations that require special equipment to remove, or you might discover historical artifacts that need to be investigated by archaeologists.
Wow, okay, those are some curveballs I wouldn't have even thought of. It makes you realize that no matter how much you plan, there's always an element of the unknown in construction.
That's the nature of building. You're working with the earth, and the earth is full of surprises.
I guess that's part of what makes it so challenging and exciting. So, with all these potential risks lurking around every corner, what can homeowners do to minimize their risk and keep things on track?
Well, it all starts with careful planning and thorough research.
Okay, so due diligence is key.
Absolutely. Don't rush into anything. Take your time to understand the process, get multiple bids from reputable contractors, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Knowledge is your best defense against those unexpected surprises.
And communication. We've talked about that a lot, but it seems like clear communication is really the foundation of a successful construction project.
You got it. Communication is everything. It builds trust, prevents misunderstandings, and keeps everyone on the same page.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the excitement of those floor plans to the more sobering realities of risk management. It's a lot to wrap your head around, but I feel like I'm starting to get a better grasp of the complexities involved in building a house.
That's great to hear. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to construction.
So, where do we go from here? What's next on our deep dive agenda?
Let's shift gears and explore that MajorWorksContract.pdf you've provided. We'll break down some of the key sections and shed light on those essential legal details that every homeowner and contractor should understand.
Sounds good. I'm ready to dive into the heart of the contract. All right, let's dig into this Major Works contract. It looks pretty dense.
Yeah, it's not exactly light reading, but it's the backbone of your entire construction project, so it's important to understand the key elements.
Okay, so where do we even begin with something like this? It's full of legal jargon, and honestly, it makes my head spin a little.
Well, let's break it down section by section. It might seem overwhelming at first, but we'll try to make it as painless as possible.
All right, I'm ready. Hit me with the legalese.
Okay, so the contract starts with Section A, the overview. This section lays out the basic framework of the agreement. It clarifies roles and responsibilities, like who's calling the shots. Usually, the architect acts as the administrator.
Okay, so the architect is kind of like the referee, making sure everyone plays by the rules.
Exactly. And it emphasizes the importance of written instructions. Any changes or decisions need to be documented in writing to avoid confusion and disputes later on.
Right, because verbal agreements can be easily misinterpreted or forgotten. So everything in writing. Got it. What's next?
Section B covers the contract documents. This is where you'll find all the nitty-gritty details like the drawings, specifications, schedules, and any other relevant documents that are part of the agreement.
It's like the evidence locker for the entire project.
Exactly. And it emphasizes the importance of addressing any discrepancies or omissions in those documents promptly. If you spot a conflict between the drawings and the specifications, you need to flag it early on.
Okay, so attention to detail is crucial. Don't just assume everything is perfect, right?
Right. It's better to catch those issues early on than have them snowball into bigger problems later. Next up is Section C, security. This section outlines the types of security provided to the owner to ensure the contractor fulfills their obligations.
So it's like insurance for the homeowner, making sure they're protected if the contractor walks off the job or goes bankrupt.
Precisely. It could involve things like cash retention or unconditional guarantees from a bank or financial institution.
Okay, so it's all about minimizing risk and protecting the homeowner's investment.
Exactly. Now let's move on to Section D, which covers liability. This section is all about determining who's responsible if something goes wrong.
Oh boy, liability. This is where things can get a little hairy, right?
It can be a bit tricky. The contract needs to clearly define who bears responsibility for risks before, during, and after construction. It also outlines the concept of indemnity, which basically means one party agrees to protect the other party from certain losses or damages.
Okay, so it's like a legal safety net, making sure someone is accountable if things go south. What about insurance? I'm guessing that's covered in the next section.
Got it. Section E is all about insurance. It specifies the types of insurance required for the project, like public liability insurance, workers' compensation insurance, and builder's risk insurance.
So many types of insurance. I'm starting to understand why construction projects can be so expensive.
Insurance is a necessary cost, but it's worth it for the peace of mind it provides.
And the contract outlines who's responsible for maintaining those insurance policies throughout the project.
Absolutely. It also outlines procedures for what happens if a party fails to maintain the necessary coverage. It's all about protecting everyone involved.
Okay, so we've covered the overview, the documents, security, liability, insurance. What's next?
Section F, the site.
Yeah.
It sounds simple, but it's important. This section emphasizes the importance of site examination before construction begins.
Right, because you never know what you might find lurking beneath the surface.
Exactly. It also introduces the concept of latent conditions, basically. Unforeseen physical conditions on the site that could impact the project.
Like those buried utilities or unstable soil we talked about earlier?
Precisely. The contract needs to address how those situations are handled, who's responsible for the additional costs, and how it affects the project timeline. Now moving on to Section G, progress of the works.
This is where things start to get exciting, right? Actual construction.
This section outlines the contractor's obligations regarding quality assurance, program adherence, sticking to the schedule, and coordinating with other contractors who may be involved.
Ah, yes, because a construction project is like a symphony with multiple players working together in harmony.
A symphony that sometimes sounds a bit more like a heavy metal concert.
Okay, I can imagine. And what about those inevitable situations where things don't go according to plan? Like, what if unexpected costs arise or there are delays?
That's covered in Section H, claims to adjust the contract. This section outlines the process for making claims related to variations, delays, or those unexpected costs.
So it's like a safety valve, a way to address those unforeseen circumstances that can pop up during construction.
Exactly. It also specifies the documentation required to support those claims, so it's important to keep detailed records throughout the project. Now jumping ahead to Section J, variations to the works. This section outlines the procedures for handling changes to the original scope of work.
Okay, variations. So, What if I suddenly decide I want a bigger kitchen island or an extra bathroom?
That's considered a variation, and the contract needs to address how those changes are handled, who approves them, and how they impact the cost and the timeline. It also covers urgent instructions that may be necessary to address unforeseen issues that require immediate action.
So it's like a roadmap for navigating those what-if scenarios that inevitably pop up during construction.
Exactly. Flexibility is important in construction, but it needs to be managed within a clear framework. Now, let's skip ahead to Section L, Adjustment of Time.
Adjustment of time. So we're talking about delays, right?
This section outlines the various causes of delay that could entitle the contractor to an extension of time. Things like inclement weather, variations to the work, unforeseen site conditions, basically, anything that's beyond the contractor's control.
So it's about being fair to the contractor, recognizing that sometimes delays are unavoidable.
Exactly. And it's also about protecting the homeowner from unreasonable delays, ensuring the project moves forward as efficiently as possible.
Okay, so we're getting close to the finish line now, right? What happens when the house is finally built?
Well, that brings us to Section M, Practical Completion. This section outlines the criteria for achieving practical completion, essentially, when the house is ready for occupancy. It also outlines the procedure for inspections, the issuance of the certificate of practical completion, and what happens if there are delays in issuing that certificate.
So it's like the official handover the moment the homeowner can finally say, this is my house.
Exactly. It's a significant milestone, but it doesn't mean the project is completely finished.
Right, because there's still that whole defects liability period, right? The time when the contractor is responsible for fixing any issues that arise.
Precisely. That's typically covered in another section, and it outlines the time frame for reporting and rectifying defects.
Okay, so practical completion is a big step, but it's not the final step. And speaking of the final step, what about payment for the works?
That's covered in Section N. It outlines the entire payment process, including progress claims, the issuance of payment certificates, and of course, that glorious final payment upon completion.
The moment everyone's been waiting for. And I'm guessing there are procedures in place for handling disputes if they arise.
You bet. Section P is all about dispute resolution. It outlines the various methods for resolving disputes, including mediation, arbitration, and even litigation as a last resort.
So it's like a roadmap for navigating those disagreements and hopefully finding a resolution that works for everyone.
Exactly. The goal is to find a fair and amicable solution without resorting to costly and time-consuming legal battles.
Okay, so we're almost done with this contract deep dive. Are there any other sections we should touch on?
Just a couple more. Section Q covers termination of the contract, outlining the circumstances under which either party can terminate the agreement and how those situations are handled. And finally, Section R covers miscellaneous provisions, like how notices are served, how the contract can be assigned, and which state or territory law governs the agreement.
Okay, so those are like the housekeeping details, the fine print that's still important to understand. Wow, we've really dissected this entire contract. I feel like I could write my own construction contract now, or at least I know who to call when I need one drafted.
Well, it's always best to consult with a legal professional when dealing with contracts. But you've definitely gained a much deeper understanding of the key elements and the importance of having a solid legal framework in place for your construction project.
It's been an incredible journey, exploring all the facets of building a house, from the initial site prep to the final handshake.
Building a house is a complex undertaking, but it's also an incredibly rewarding one. And with careful planning, clear communication, and a solid legal foundation, it can be a truly fulfilling experience.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of building regulations and construction contracts. We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
And remember, if you're thinking about building your own dream home, take your time, do your research, and don't be afraid to ask lots of questions. After all, you're creating something special, a place where memories will be made for years to come.
That's a beautiful way to end our deep dive. Thanks again for joining us.